Welcome. Welcome to the Gabriella Miller Pediatric Research Programs Community Webinar. We are excited to be here to engage in what promises to be an excellent discussion between patient families, advocates, physicians, and researchers on the ways Kids First advocates and advances research in congenital conditions and pediatric cancer. A few general housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded, and they will be available after the event. We encourage any and all questions throughout the conversation, so please submit those questions that you may have or that may come up for you using the Q&A feature, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible. The closed captioning is also available. While many of you may have had the opportunity to review the biographies of our speakers today, I would be remiss if I did not take the chance to introduce them. Dr. Jannine Cody is Professor of Genetics in the Department of Pediatrics, Director of Chromosome 18 Clinical Research Center at University of Texas Health San Antonio. In 1985, her daughter Elizabeth was born with a rare chromosome abnormality called 18q, and her daughter has since inspired Jannine's continuing research leadership and advocacy on behalf of the patients and families impacted by genetics and rare conditions. Ellyn Miller is president and founder of Smashing Walnuts Foundation. Ellyn is the mother of Gabriella Miller, after whom the Gabriella Miller Kids First Pediatric Research Program is named. She is a renowned leader and advocate, well known for her work in advancing legislation, policy, and research on behalf of patients and their families. Amanda Haddock is co-founder and president of the Dragon Master Initiative. Amanda's 16-year-old son was diagnosed with glioblastoma in 2010. And today, David's memory continues to inspire Amanda to serve as an advocate for patients and their families as she pushes for progress in cancer research infrastructure. Dr. Eric Liao is director for the Center for Craniofacial Innovation at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's a presidential scholar, endowed chair, and professor of surgery. He's also vice chair of academic affairs for Department of Surgery at the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine. Eric pioneers first-in-child trials and treatments for patients with orofacial clefts and complex craniofacial conditions. His groundbreaking research in human genetics and developmental biology aims to address critical knowledge gaps and shape the future of pediatric healthcare. I am Dr. Andrea Harris, Health Science Policy Analyst at NIH's Office of Strategic Coordination, also known as the Common Fund. I'm also Strategic Planning, Evaluation, and Communications Lead for the Gabriella Miller Kids First Pediatric Research Program. In 2020, my son was born with short rib thoracic dysplasia with polydactyly, a very rare genetic condition that is most frequently fatal. I have the honor of being your moderator for this discussion. So we'll jump right in with our panelists. Ellyn, I'd love to start with you. As the mother of Gabriella Miller and the founder of Smashing Walnuts, could you share how Gabriella's story led to the development of Kids First?
Yes, please, I would love to. First, though, let me thank everybody that's involved with the Kids First and all of the panelists. Without all of this work that's happening, we obviously wouldn't be getting the cures, working towards the cures that we need. And that's exactly what Gabriella wanted. So Gabriella was 9 when she was diagnosed with a terminal brain cancer called DIPG, diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. And she had said to me on more than one occasion after diagnosis that it just wasn't fair. And when I explained to her about her treatment, one of the treatments that she was getting, that it was a clinical trial, and when I explained what that was, that it wasn't a proven cure, she said, so I'm a kid and I'm a guinea pig. And it was spot on. And Gabriella didn't like that. And so she became this amazing childhood cancer awareness advocate. And 2 weeks before Gabriella died, she was interviewed by the Truth 365. And it was at the time back in 2013, our government shut down, sequestration. They couldn't balance their budget. And NIH was closed, and many other institutes that had anything to do with the government were closed down. So children were being turned away from getting their life-saving treatments because our budget wasn't balanced. And during this interview, Gabriella had received the question, if you could say anything to our elected officials about kids like you, what would you say? And Gabriella said, stop talking and start doing. And then she said something else that I won't say here. She said a bad word. So she said that we needed to take action. And 1 week after that interview, Gabriella came home on hospice, and she died 2 weeks after that interview. And the interviewer had taken about a dozen different clips, and he threw them out on social media. And that one clip where Gabriella said, stop talking and start doing, caught the attention of former House Majority Leader Eric Cantor. And he contacted my husband and me. So 1 month after that interview, 2 weeks after Gabriella died, my husband and I were in Leader Cantor's office, and he told us about a piece of legislation, the Kids First, that proposed to move $126 million over to NIH for childhood disease and cancer research. And it was just languishing. It wasn't moving. And he asked if we would give permission to attach Gabriella's name. And we did. And within 4 months of Gabriella's name being attached, it was being signed into law. And then another about 8 months later, and we first got it appropriated. So it's just been amazing how a little kid who didn't like the fact that there weren't good treatments for children helped to lead to this amazing program.
Thank you. As we look at the great impact that she has had for all of us who've touched this program, how can we move that forward for other families? What steps can families take to support Kids First, and why is it crucial for families to engage with policymakers on this issue?
There are so many different levels of engagement that folks can have. For anybody who's watching, or anyone who's a panelist here who's had a diagnosis, especially for a child, and then throw in something that's terminal, we're kind of floating, like, where do we go? What do we do? Who can we turn to? And we may or may not think that we can go to our elected officials. But what the world needs to understand is that our stories, the stories of our children, are so incredibly powerful. And our elected officials don't know what they don't know. If we don't share with them that we're a constituent, that this is something that matters to us, then that's not on their agenda. So to reach out to your local, state, and federal officials and introduce yourself, tell your story, and say, what are you doing? And what can we do to help move legislation that will improve disease research for children? It's very important and very simple to do as well.
How do you think Kids First resources can be most helpful for families and their patients themselves?
So what's very interesting is Gabriella was 10 when she died. We just passed 10 years, so pretty much double her life. And from the time of Gabriella's diagnosis to where we are today, it's a different world. We may not have the cures yet, but we know so much more than we did before. A lot of that is because we're much more collaborative than we were 10, 12 years ago. And also, researchers are definitely more open to sharing data. And if you think about that, if you've got a rare disease, and if your doctor is waiting to be able to do the proper trials for that, if you could share data with others across the country and around the world, that certainly will bring us closer to doing the studies that we need to do and finding the cures. So I'd say, the collaboration that we need is very important. And again, we're advancing research and building a research-driven global community. And that's something that, 10 years ago we didn't see.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Jannine, I'm gonna turn to you and pull on your knowledge a little bit. As both a researcher and founder of the Chromosome 18 Foundation, how does Kids First data support your research goals?
Well, thank you, Andrea. In a way, we're a little bit different group than most of the cohorts for Gabriella Miller. Most of the cohorts are made up of individuals with a certain disease, type of cancer, structural birth defect, and the goal is to understand the genetics. We are kind of the opposite in that, and our kids have chromosome abnormalities. So we already know the chromosome. They have deletions of some part of chromosome 18. Some have little deletions, some have big deletions, some from one region, some from another. Almost all are individually unique. And so our first goal was to try to correlate specific conditions or aspects of the condition with the regions of the chromosome. Because it used to be when my daughter was diagnosed, you get this long list of everything that could possibly happen to someone with a chromosome 18 deletion, except she was a smaller deletion, so not all of it applied. So what we're doing is correlating regions of the chromosome and eventually the genes with each individual's specific deletion in order to help guide their care, inform their physicians on what to focus on and what to ignore from that big list. However, we still don't know it all, and there's still a lot of variability. And so the Gabriella Miller program is going to help us understand, refine some of the regions down to individual genes, but also I think some of the variability will be a combination of a gene deletion on chromosome 18 with another variant on another chromosome. So this is our first opportunity to get to that knowledge. And of course, we believe that the genes are the window to the biology, and it's the biology that's going to lead to treatments. And if you're asking yourself how, my kid has a structural birth defect, how is knowing the genetics going to affect it? They already have it. Well, I can give you one example using my daughter, of course, who's now an adult, but she was born, part of her chromosome 18 condition manifested in a bilateral cleft palate and cleft lip. So instead of a single bone arch across the top of her mouth, hers was in 3 pieces. She, over many years, has had 2 bilateral bone grafts that initially worked, but then disintegrated. Then she had a mid-face distraction where they cut the bone from the middle of the face and they advance it with screws. Every day they turn the screw a little more. It worked beautifully, but it all retracted over time. And others with a deletion similar to hers have ear canals that close before they get to the eardrum. So it's a bony closure. And many of those, it's a common surgery or a not unusual surgery to open that canal. And in people with chromosome 18 abnormalities, the canals often collapse. And so if we understood more about the biology, what is unique about the bones in this part of the face, if we had some sort of supplement based on the biology or the genetics that could be used in conjunction with the surgery, maybe her first bone graft would have taken, or any of the others, or kids who have the ear canal surgery would be successful and it wouldn't close again. So understanding the genes, which are the window to the biology, which then can lead to treatment, really can make a difference, even for structural birth defects.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about how you engage community with your organization and how Kids First can partner with you and organizations like yours?
Okay, it's a little different angle than I was thinking about the answer to that. Organizationally, I mean, we have one big advantage in that our research study is a lifetime longitudinal study. So we were able to go back and reconsent all of our families for broad use, which is required for Gabriella Miller, which is hugely important. When most of these people were originally consented, even 30 years ago, there was no such thought of such things. So we were able to reconsent, but also if we learn about some aspect of the genetics and the biology, we have the ability to go back to the families and say, tell us more about your diagnosis that narrows it down from this aspect to that aspect of it, for example, or even bring them in for a clinical evaluation. So we have the ability to follow up. So I would really, really urge everyone with a cohort to build those relationships. It takes manpower. We have coordinators, and that's all they do is keep up with our 700 families. I write for the newsletter for the family organization every single month about something, hopefully not too geeky, that I'm only interested in, hopefully something they're interested in too. And so keeping families engaged is really central to really moving this forward to the long-term next steps. And that's something often not supported by foundations, external foundations that might help a family support group or the NIH, but it's hugely important. And that's really where the future, I think, of medicine is going to be, is in this high resolution phenotyping, to use the genetics term, to be able to really go back and understand what's really going on with the individuals who are involved.
Thank you. Amanda Haddock, good morning. I am going to turn to you just to ask a couple of questions here. From your perspective, why is data sharing crucial for accelerating the discovery of childhood cancer and other rare disease cures?
Well, first of all, I think that it's something that seems very obvious to patients. So I think my first answer would be because the patients want that and are calling for that. And I think that Kids First is answering the demand of the patient community, and more the research community as well. We know that these childhood cancers and these congenital disorders are very rare. So combining those data sets really allows us to achieve like statistical significance. So these larger data sets enable pattern identifications. We can start to see what's causing these diseases and these conditions and what's driving their growth or what's keeping them from growing, right? When we have those patterns, we can really start to make better discoveries. I also think a really rich data resource like this can help attract other researchers, especially young researchers, to the field. They don't always have access to quality data sets. And so making this kind of data available widely means that younger people and people who are interested can get their hands on this relatively rare data so that they can work and do some make significant effort in this area. And hopefully that would also encourage pharmaceutical companies to work on these conditions. It's easy to go, well, it's rare and we don't really have access to that data. So when we combine the data and we lay it out there and say, here it is, then they don't have that excuse any longer, right? We're making it easy for them to come in and work with this data. And so I think that that's really important if we want faster discoveries.
How can increased collaboration through initiatives like Kids First, which really tap on the data sharing part of it, lead to improved medical treatments and ultimately cures? I know you mentioned the pharmaceutical companies and others, but how does that turn to sort of the meaningful work for the patient? How does that turn around?
Yeah, so collaborations are really important in every step of the process, right? From just the beginning when researchers are trying to figure out what to work on. A lot of times if they can see what's already been done, they can kind of learn from other people's mistakes and pick up from, a more valid point to start their work. We like to say that they're failing faster, which kind of sounds funny, but it essentially gives them a more productive place to start their research from. And it lets them, like this type of collaboration lets us learn from each individual patient in context of all of those other patients. So it lets us move closer to personalized medicine, which I know is a big buzz term these days, but you can't do that unless you know something about what that patient is going to need. And so using the data from other patients helps us inform that particular patient's care. And it could really like speed the adoption of new treatment protocols, right? And help us improve the outcomes for these patients more quickly. It can help us spread, a lot of times, it's very true today that, you go to a major center that works with that particular disease or condition, so that you're getting the experts in that particular field, but it's not always possible for patients in middle America, maybe, or not even middle America, sometimes just an hour or two away from a major center to be able to get there and get the care from those experts. But if we're sharing and we're collaborating, then hospitals everywhere will be able to give that same level of care more quickly. They don't have to wait for published results that happen 10 years down the road. They can do it right away.
Thank you. So we've started to talk a little bit about treatment and patient care. I'm going to switch over to Eric. As a doctor, why do you believe that Kids First is essential for driving advancements in patient care?
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to everyone on the call and to the panelists. At the end, I'll just refer to what Amanda said. What does personalized medicine mean for pediatric conditions? And so many of us are on this call. I didn't also realize this, but not only are we here as physicians and researchers and so forth, but we're also here as patients. Having gone through the same process, similar process as some of my patients with fetal diagnoses are really scary. We were dealing with this condition that we never even heard about until it happened, called amnion-chorion separation, right? So I was so impacted by going through this as a patient. I have always, as a plastic surgeon that help families and patients with cleft repairs, I've always done the fetal consultation myself. Because families at the end fundamentally would like two things. One is answers, and given those answers, well, what can we do about it to make it better? And what personalized medicine, at least for me, what it means for congenital or pediatric problems then, right, is to have those answers. We have to harness the power of genetics. And this is certainly an example where the sum is definitely more than its separate parts, because if we only had our small data sets, we'll never find the answers. We don't have enough statistical power. We don't have that discovery. And there's no organization in the world that can put all the data together. It really requires a leadership like the NIH to really put it together for us and have that data be shared among everyone, right? So that we can all then derive the answers. So that's the first part. That's sort of the front end of human genetics. Personalized medicine then means, well, what can you do beyond diagnosis? Medicine at the end is about two things. It's about diagnosis and treatment. So what can you do about treatment? It may not be like what Jannine said, it may not be that we need to have an in utero cure, right? But if we know something about the molecular signature of this condition, can you prognosticate the natural history? Can you predict how the bone cells will heal or not? How this child will do with this type of treatment or not? What can you anticipate? What can you prepare for? If you can, it actually really moves the needle for that family and for that child. And on top of that, we actually now have some opportunities, at least for single gene disorders, single amino acid in those single genes. We do have now in 2024, also led by the NIH in many cases, the ability to rewrite that genetic code? If so, can we rewrite the genetic code for those cells, even after birth during development, that changes the trajectory of the clinical outcome, right? So to be able to imagine the diagnoses and the treatment requires all this big data. So big data is tough, right? Because it's like when we collect the data, analyze data, the return on that work is decade or more later than the actual generation of it, but we have to start somewhere, and Kids First leads in that. And that's why it's so important to provide answers and treatments for patients in the future.
Thank you. As we've sort of started to talk about how this data and sort of the collection of information can play a role for an individual patient, how can we think about that in terms of the future landscape of pediatric healthcare? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that from my vantage point, seeing all the exciting data come through, I think one is actually still discovery. The fundamental mechanism biology, we need to understand things better, right? And it's hard to predict where that understanding is actually going to lead. So that's one part, is really still the discovery-driven work. The second then is the opportunity to harness data and combine it with multiple data types, multimodal analyses for the clinical application, right? So I think already what's happening is, at least in areas of pediatric cancer and so forth, we know certain gene variants are going to do better with certain types of trials, right? So that kind of data needs to feed back into Kids First so all the centers know about it. Another really exciting aspect, I think Kids First in its iterations may start to consider or operationalize, is actually having clinical return of data in almost clinical time frame. There's still a key component to discovery where the data will drive discovery, and it's hard to imagine what the discovery will lead to. But that fundamental work is so super important. The second is as Kids First also evolves and as technology evolves, it may be feasible to actually have return of data in somewhat of a clinical time frame, to actually then in more real time, relevant to the patient and families, be able to change the course of their care, either to provide better diagnosis or even potentially influence their treatment algorithm.
Thank you. And how do you envision collaboration between clinicians and researchers within Kids First to ultimately benefit patients, pediatric patients with craniofacial conditions, and in particular, just that group of patients?
So so I think, Kids First is mostly a data generation platform, right? And data harmonization platform. So the subsequent use of that data is then, of course, really critical. And I think it may be adjacent, but maybe beyond the scope of Kids First, the project itself, so that the collaboration part to, how to use that data for specific diseases such as craniofacial, but whatever is true for craniofacial is true for most congenital conditions, okay? So these are very general statements. I think one mechanism that's already in place is to make, I think the Kids First awards secondary use grants, for example, right? So analysis of the Kids First data. What may be great would be to align then the different disease institutes based on this data. What can you really then tackle as a clinical problem, right? And really then fund sort of bigger projects to go after diseases, because the smaller grants and secondary analysis doesn't really achieve that part of it.
Thank you. So I'm going to open this up to all of you, because I think you each have perspectives that can speak to this. But from each of your vantage points, what do you see as the most significant challenge in leveraging large-scale data like that provided by Kids First to advance medical research and improve patient outcomes?
So
Please.
I'll jump in first. I think that there's still a lot of institutional barriers. I see that when we start working with new hospitals that we're trying to onboard and get them data sharing. There's just a lot of pushback from the institutions. for various reasons, but I think financial is probably a big part of it, right? They want their researchers to be at the forefront, and sharing data might mean that someone else has, the same opportunities that their internal researchers do. And I think we've got to really move past that mindset. It's not in the patient's best interest at all. And I think that's a place where Kids First and the government can really lead and sort of make that a mandate for everyone, that, but patients want their data shared. And I do think, obviously consent is important, and we need to make sure that each individual patient wants their data shared. That's the very first step. But assuming that they do, then we have to make sure that it's shared in a timely manner and as widely as possible.
I think another huge gap that has not really been addressed, to my knowledge, is how to get the information to your average pediatrician's office in a way that they can. I mean, what pediatrician's going to go to ClinVar, and look up a variant and see, it isn't going to happen. They don't even know that exists. And so this is one of the things we've been trying to do, is take all the research and consolidate it into here's what you need to know for a kid of this age. Here's what you need to know with this. And there's not much recognition of the reality between what the scientists know and a format a busy clinician with 15 or 20 minutes a kid can deal with.
So I'll share that in having attended various events that have parent or patient advocates, researchers, institutions, it's interesting how we all think differently. So as a patient advocate, when you talk about data sharing, I mean, I got a diagnosis, your child has cancer. And the next sentence, there wasn't even a breath in between, it was, she's terminal. So as a parent, take anything you want. You can have it. I'll sign anything. Go ahead, share it, and go ahead. An institution, you know what? They need to make certain that all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, to make certain that they don't cross any boundaries. So it's interesting when you combine the patient advocates, the institutions, the researchers, the frontline doctors, how we all come at it in a different perspective. And in that aspect, it goes back to, we need to data share, and we need to be more collaborative. And I think that if all of those things come together sometime in the future, things will move quicker and smoother.
And actually, to build on that idea of everyone having a different perspective, to me, research-wise, one of the huge advantages to the data sharing is I haven't thought of all the important questions. Our group hasn't necessarily, and I don't have every known skill set in all of science, or our team doesn't, that we have here. And so the fact that the data are available for broad use means that somebody else with a completely different idea and approach that our group never thought of might come to it and discover something using skills we don't have. And so I am very excited about all those possibilities. I hope those people are out there and wanting to look through this data, because I know there's cool stuff there that we haven't thought of, or for someone who has a completely different approach to thinking about it. So scientifically, I think the broad use is going to be such an important aspect of this. If we can just get the broader scientific community to know about it, think about it, get excited about it.
Thank you. You've both mentioned collaborations and partnerships. Can you speak to any notable collaborations or partnerships facilitated by Kids First that have enhanced research efforts that you support?
If I could jump in and share first. and it's interesting how our childhood disease world is really so small. I was in DC for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. I met a woman purely by chance. She was sitting next to me at an event. She lives down in Florida. I'm outside of DC. We struck up a conversation and became friends. Her daughter died from another brain cancer. Her family started a foundation, and they fund research. So I had asked her to join one of my Zoom meetings with congressional offices, and she became a regular person that was on those meetings. Because of that, she knew about the Kids First program. And when she was going to give a grant to the doctor that treated her daughter, she asked this doctor if she knew about the Kids First. And the doctor did not know that. So my friend quickly made the connection. And this doctor called my friend back and said, within a month, said, you just shaved off 20 years of my work, because I needed to wait for a child to be diagnosed. I needed to wait for that child to die and wait for that bereaved family to say that they would donate. And it would have taken her 20 years to get enough tissue to be able to do her research. And within immediately of getting approved with the Kids First, she was able to get all of the samples that she needed, the specimens that she needed, and was able to do her work. I mean, that shaved off 20 years. That's exciting. Every time I tell that story, I get the chills, because that's how quickly this program is going to help advance the research.
Thank you. Any other insights from the panel?
That's thank you for sharing that story. I think that is, as I was listening and taking notes, I want to go back to what Amanda and Jannine were talking about patient and sharing the data, right, and how important that is for people who are in the trenches doing this work. And NIH really then NIH has levers that we individual institutions don't have. NIH can compel us to all use the same set of policies. Please do that. We need to have federated data sets that we can have easily shared between us, so that any user can download it and look at the data. And we will like to have minimal drag from our institutions for data sharing, so that we can really advance the field. And as you talk about the question, well, how do we communicate this to the everyday pediatrician? This is done I think one way is Ms. Miller's example is to empower and immediately partner with patient advocacy groups, right? Whatever disease or condition we study, we need to work with the patient foundations. There are two foundations I've been working with. One I've done a lot of work with, and I learned from the foundation what are the problems most pressing to their patient group. And it's not to cure that in utero problem. It's actually just to make the everyday treatment or condition better is a big advance, right? So then if we can get the data out, then to the patient advocacy groups, they can tell their pediatricians wherever they are, what Kids First is doing, what advances are coming out from Kids First, so that as Kids First evolves, of course, we need to get the data and data sharing, but also then if we have the second arm of the treatment side on both ends of the genomic journey, that would then match the patient journey.
Thank you. Is there anything that the public, researchers, and clinicians can do to effectively communicate the value of genomic data sharing to the public and policymakers? How can folks bolster all of this excellent work that you're talking about? Anyone? Okay. As we look at, please.
We can just do what Ellyn said. Go to Washington, talk to offices, My very first endeavor into the advocacy world many years ago, I went to a NORD meeting, and the schedule for the conference had a half a day for going to the Hill. And I laughed when I saw that. I thought, oh yeah, really? Nobody does that. Oh yeah, people do that, and you need to do that. You need to be there. You need to go to collect your members who are in the region for some of the key people on key committees. There's a lot of homework to do. So you're talking to the right people who can help. But again, tell your story and take your child. I didn't always take my daughter, and there was a big difference when she was there. And so there's nothing more powerful than your individual story.
Jumping on that, the hill days are really powerful because if first there's strength in numbers, and second, you just build a confidence when you hear other people sharing their stories. But what I'll also say is, you know, Jannine had just mentioned go to DC. You don't need to. I mean, you should, but start at your local level, because your local officials, they'll know like what's going on in the state, what's going on in your local community. We all hear some big name hospitals that are out there, and that's fantastic. But many of us, when you first get a diagnosis, it's your local hospital. If your local level doesn't have resources, then you know you're really behind. So start local, and then state, and then also build those relationships, because I have built really great relationships with folks that have been at a local or a state level, and they've moved up, and now are at a federal level. So I've developed that relationship. They know who I am, and that makes it certainly an easier connection.
I think I'd like to add too that a lot of times we look to the patient organizations to go and do this advocacy, and they do a great job in that space. But it's also really powerful when a researcher or a clinician joins their voice to that mission, right? And no one wants to pull them away from the very valuable work that they're doing. But I think that they can partner with groups, especially like Smashing Walnuts. Ellyn does a great job of just like packaging that up really tightly and going, here, you know, this is what the message is right now. This is the most relevant thing because this is the legislation that's pending or whatever. And lending their voice, because I think sometimes the patient community can be discredited because we're not seen necessarily as experts in the field by these lawmakers. They don't understand how much time and effort we've put into all of this. But I do think having, you know, a voice that is representing each segment of the community, bring the patients with you, bring a doctor, bring a researcher, you know, and if not in person, at least, you know, online, somehow get those voices into the mix, because it's not just the patient community that's frustrated with the situation, right? The clinicians and the researchers also are frustrated and need access to more data and better tools and in a more timely way. So I think that we all need to be speaking those same words together.
Thank you. As we sort of think about the data side of Kids First, there are many physicians who are collecting real-time data as an imperative part of their care. There are also patients and patient registries that would like to get involved. How, from your various vantage points, can these folks really start to play a role in what Kids First is trying to do?
I'll jump in really quick and just say that if there are any groups that are out there that have a unique disease or a data set, they should absolutely get all of their data from all of their members over to the Kids First, because you want to have as robust as possible a data collection that you could have out there. And you might be in one locality, but somebody else of the same might be in another. And then taking that even further, if your disease has a certain mutation and you have access to the Kids First data and you type in that mutation, it might not even be for your disease. It might be for a completely different disease, but they share what they've discovered, what drugs they're using. And that might open the doors for something that our researchers never would have thought of.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add exactly that, and that, you know, for especially in the rare disease space, there are many foundations are too small on their own to do some of this work, right? So there's a mechanism for foundations to partner either with the NIH or organizations to do it closer to where they are. That will be very impactful, to share data, share specimen, for example. And I just also want to put a plug in. If anybody wants to bring a doctor, please give me a call.
It sounds like there's some good space for these conversations to continue.
I just saw in the comments that someone said Every Life Foundation is a great resource for legislative advocacy. And I've spoken with them, I've advocated with them, and they are broad-based disease. It's not necessarily just one, but again, what happens with organizations like theirs is you've got a larger population of folks that are going to meet with the elected officials. You're making those connections, you're much more powerful. Instead of just a singular voice, but advocating together for disease as one voice. So definitely check into organizations like that.
If we
Thank you.
could go back to the benefit of like sharing data for these groups, if they are collecting data on a patient population, bringing it into an environment like Kids First can really help enhance the way they're collecting their data, both through just, you know, data standards and making sure that they're building it in a way that it can be federated, but also through like peer review, right, and increased usage. And you start to look at things from a different perspective and see what fields other people are collecting. So maybe you haven't empowered your data as best as you possibly could. And by trying to bring it alongside these other data sets, then you start to see the way other people are thinking about their data sets. And I think it can be very powerful, you know, for each individual condition. And then, like Ellyn mentioned, you know, being able to look at various mutations across disease types can really help lead to faster discoveries as well. So I think it's a win-win. I think we just need to really help people embrace that sharing aspect of it.
Thank you.
And jumping on
and-
that sharing aspect of that, taking it down a different avenue. And I saw in the Q&A, there's a question about this, like, how do we let our doctors know about that? And honestly, if you, whoever you are, if you're a patient advocate, if you're a researcher, I mean, share this with everybody that you know, because we need to make it a household resource. And so at this point, I think a really great way of being able to get this out into the community is if you're a patient, if your child is a patient, you need to talk with your doctors and ask them if they know about this. And they could go onto the website and research it. They could sign up for the emails from them. I mean, just share it in the most basic possible way so that we could spread that. And certainly the doctors and researchers that are involved with this do a fantastic job of sharing that with their folks that they work with.
I think those conversations are meaningful and significant. And I say that to mean across all persons, from patients to physicians to researchers at conferences, in the treatment space, and at the board tables. So I'm excited to hear that people are interested in carrying on these conversations, just to let people know that this is an option and these sorts of programs exist and this data is present, and that support is there as well. So thank you for highlighting that conversation, and thank you to the person who is attending who asked that question. As we look ahead, what are your hopes and aspirations for the future of medicine built using genetic information and how it changes the lives of patients and their families?
So I think that we're not very far from being at a place where at the moment of diagnosis, right, a child is able to get genetic testing. Efforts like the MCI are doing that, for certain conditions right now. And being able to use that child's own data to inform their care and to get them the best treatment available at that moment in time, and hopefully start curing some of these conditions that we haven't really seen any progress on in decades or maybe ever. And really giving our children a chance at growing up and living high quality, productive adult lives. And I think this effort is really getting us there, right? We're right on the cusp of that. And it's through these types of collaboration and data sharing that's going to get us there. So I think, I know that sounds kind of pie in the sky, but I think we're going to start curing these kids. I think we're going to give them those quality lives, and it's because of efforts like Kids First.
Amanda, you said it so well. I truly believe what you just said. And it's not just myself, but our entire building. I think we really feel it like we're at the precipice as we use better tools to really decrease the barrier of asking the questions. And that's what Kids First really leads and neutralizes, right? We all have the data, right? That's why the sharing is so important. And so that the community of researchers and physicians and scientists will harness that data and ask their questions. And then the patients will benefit. I'm really hoping that it's going to happen in our lifetimes, that we will have cures. And we're really going to make a difference. So we can stop just talking about it and doing something about it for sure.
Excellent. We'd like to invite any additional questions from folks in the audience. If you have any, please feel free to drop them in the question and answers, the Q&A box. We're excited to make sure that we've touched on the things that are important to you. While we wait for a couple of those to populate, I want to give a quick plug. At the conclusion of this webinar, there will be a survey. And we would love to hear from you, to learn a bit more of your perspective, to understand what it is that you'd like to know, and really sort of tap in on that. So please, don't hesitate to fill those out as we go aside. The link is also in the chat here, so please take a moment at the conclusion of this to tell us a bit about yourself and your thoughts. There's one question here. Could somebody I would love it if someone would, in the simplest of ways, give an example of how someone might break down how Kids First works. How can somebody explain what Kids First is? Anyone have a moment? Thought?
You could try. So Kids First is basically a way where all the different contributors, these are hospitals, research institutions, are able to collect blood, saliva, tissue from patients across all structural birth condition or pediatric cancers. So these are children with tumors or children with anatomic or physical differences. And we're able to collect that tissue and we can analyze it with different techniques. The most common is something called gene sequencing. And turns out by knowing the gene sequences and putting all of our data together, we can start to at least try to understand the genetic underpinning of some of these conditions. Now all conditions are due to genes, but for those that we think genetic has influence, we can understand that. That is the goal of all of human genetics for the last 15, 20 years. But once we have that information, how can we harness that information to actually make clinical impact, improve diagnosis and treatment? That's where we are now. We're trying to do that part. And maybe in the future iterations of Kids First, we can connect that better through the leadership of the NIH.
Thank you. And for patients, once that information is collected and sent to NIH or sent forward as part of the program, researchers can, once it's collected, researchers apply and receive support to have whole genome sequencing that allows for that information to be put into a database, a big portal, which is the Kids First Data Resource Portal. And folks can submit their information to go in and access that, make comparisons or look a little bit deeper into what that information is and what information we can pull that might be new or different or connecting across various conditions. Hopefully that is a bit helpful. You can always look on the Kids First DRC website for more information on a simple sort of way to break it down, what conditions are included so far, as we are open to always learning more information. And if you're interested in how NIH can support further submission or analysis, please take a look at the NIH Kids First website. It is 12 o'clock.
I was going to say really quick, I did see
Please.
a question in the Q&A that was asking about the 2.0 and it getting passed. So if I could very quickly share that just yesterday, it passed through the House. So that's really very exciting. And so now on to the Senate, like we're already working it in the Senate. It's already passed committee. We just need it to pass the Senate and the Senate and the House to agree, and then it will be a done deal. So we're getting closer. We're getting closer.
Thank you for all of the voices along that path. It is 12 o'clock. I want to respect your time. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to our panelists for sharing everything that you have. You are truly inspirational, and we are excited to hear more of your voice. So thank you. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.